Alright, in this video we're not necessarily reviewing, but we're going to get into recommended industrial music literature. I have another piece of literature that I would highly recommend that anyone that is interested in industrial music should take a good read through, which would be Shock Factory, the visual culture of industrial music. I wasn't originally going to pick this book up because I thought it may not be relevant to my interests. However, I received a gift during the holiday season, and as a result I ended up purchasing this book because it was on the eventual to read or to purchase list. And this book, I just finished reading it. We're in, I think it's March 6th today. I finished reading it earlier this morning. This, I will be honest with you, this is probably one of the best books I have read in quite some time. I really enjoyed the read-through in this. Obviously, being that it's called Shock Factory, the visual culture of industrial music, it is about the industrial music, the visual culture of industrial music, and it gets into all the visuals of industrial music and the history of that, and kind of the artistic meaning behind those visuals. Interestingly, I do believe the cover is Cozy Fanny Tutti or Monty Kazaza. I can't quite tell. I do believe it's Cozy though. It's a scene from, I can't remember what specific scene it was from, but as you can see, the image is a little bit transgressive, at least for the time that it was taken. Matter of fact, I do believe this is actually taken from a video that Genesis, Cozy, Monty Kazaza, and maybe Peter Christopherson created. I can't specifically remember what this is from, but there's all kinds of visuals inside of this. I'm not going to show everything because some of it is quite graphic, and some of it I would say it's not appropriate for YouTube. So very, very interesting book. I think the author, Nicolas Ballet, or Ballet, I do believe it's Ballet. I do believe he's a French author. He is an art historian. He has a PhD in art history, and I do believe, if I'm not mistaken, this is his thesis, or it's a part of his thesis. And it is highly interesting, I found it very inspirational in my own endeavor. There's some interesting things in this that I did not know had happened or occurred. There's some very fucked up things like necrophilia and shit like that. I'm not going to get into those details in this video, but there is some reference to necrophilia in this by a certain artist. I can't remember the artist's first name, but I do believe their last name is Duncan. You would think that the idea of necrophilia is pretty it's very questionable. Interestingly enough, the artist that was involved in some of that, Duncan or whatever, they're actually the artistic meaning behind that whole thing that occurred is actually fairly sound, and that's just one of the things that they get into in this. Granted, that's not the entirety of this. This is basically an all-encompassing of the first and maybe a little bit of the second wave of industrial music and the visual culture of industrial music during those two waves. They get into fascism and the fascist imagery in some of industrial music. Granted, I'm not reviewing this book really in this video, but I will say some of my own conclusions that I've come to regarding that whole visual aspect of including fascist imagery or imagery of the death camps and stuff like that. it does put into question some of the reasoning behind some of the artists that use that imagery, and I would honestly say after reading through this book and seeing their reasoning behind using that kind of imagery, ultimately I think for myself it comes down to just cheap shock tactics, and I find that the artist couldn't really give a really good reason for using that kind of imagery. And the other issue with using that kind of imagery as well is the fact that once you start inviting that stuff in and using that imagery, you start inviting those types of people to come in and maybe adopt and think that the music is for fascists and those kind of people, which obviously it wasn't for most of the bands. That is just my opinion on that piece of the industrial music history and that visual history for that particular piece, the fascism piece. That's what my thoughts are on it. It does get into that in this book, obviously, and this gets into things like anti-psychiatry, medical imagery, all that kind of stuff. Transgressive things like S&M and BDSM type stuff. Very, very fucking informative and very good book. I would highly recommend this to anyone that has an interest in the visual history of industrial music, the visual culture of industrial music, and why some of the imagery is used. I've also kind of thought about the modern, this doesn't really get into too many of the modern acts. Matter of fact, it doesn't really get into any of the modern stuff. Like there's no real going into the Nine Inch Nails or the Ministries or any of that. But I would say it does make me think about modern industrial bands, and I would almost say that modern industrial bands don't really, not saying that there isn't meaning behind the artistry of their album covers or album artwork or the zines that they make today, but I would say that there initially in the first and second wave there was a lot of meaning put into the artwork, the album artwork, the zines, the videos that they were creating. There's a lot of there's a lot of meaning behind it, and I almost think that in modern times, in the whatever wave of industrial music that we are in now, I would say it's probably not as thought out as the original pioneers of industrial music. And I would say that, and this is something else from my own album artwork. Like these days I do all my own album artwork, and this has actually inspired me to, really think about how I'm presenting my music for each album that I've written, and how I want to present it, how I want to, what kind of meaning am I, what is the meaning behind what I am creating visually, and does this resonate with my overall messaging in my music? And I think a lot of the modern artists don't really think about, industrial artists don't really think about that so much anymore. It's more, these days it seems like it's more about, oh, this is a cool visual and we're just going to use this because it's fucking cool. Not that there's anything wrong with that. I don't think there's anything wrong with it, but the way I see it now for myself, I would like to have a little bit more thought and meaning behind the imagery that I'm using in my own endeavor, and that's kind of what I've come out of this book with, is that for myself I would like to put more thought into the art of the albums and all the other stuff that I do for my music endeavor visually. And once again, I will say this book is highly inspiring. Shock Factory, the visual culture of industrial music. Highly inspiring visually, very informative. If you ever end up purchasing or coming across this book, I would highly recommend anyone to pick this up. I would say this is recommended industrial music literature reading. I would say this is something that you can add to your collection that has a very, I think it's very important to industrial music. Granted, it's just visuals, but I think it's important to think about these things and the visuals, and I think the level of artistry that went behind a lot of the visuals in the industrial music culture and industrial music scene back in the first and second wave. I think that there was a lot of thought put into it, and I think it's good to know this piece of the history, good to know that, you know, what went on behind these visuals, why they were being used, why were these transgressive images being used, why were they trying to break the taboos, why were they using cut-ups, like William Burroughs type stuff, why they were using collage cut-up type visuals for, you know, zines or even the album artwork and stuff like that. I think it's important to know that piece of it because, granted, visuals are surface level, but I think it's important to think about those aspects of it because the way you present something is the initial, oh, this looks fucking cool, like this cover looks fucking cool, but there's more meaning behind the visual, and when you get into that, the meaning behind it, you realize that there's intention and there's a deeper, there's something deeper, a deeper level with these kind of things, and it's not just something that looks cool. It's actually something that, hey, this art is actually something that not only does the music express what we're feeling, but the visuals express what our music is, and the visuals are a way of breaking taboos and exploring transgressive topics and exploring and pushing the boundaries of what is not even just pushing the boundary of what is acceptable in society. It's also like taking what was going on at the time when the first wave of industrial, or even the second wave, what was going on at the time, them seeing that there's this information war going on, and it's all about access to information. And I think the idea is that they wanted to get people out of these, like, this is what life is. You are born, you go to school, maybe you after high school or whatever it is, you go get a job. That job eventually leads into getting into some kind of position where you can afford to buy a house and start a family, and you have a family, and then those, your kids hopefully will have their own jobs and they'll buy a house and, start a family, and it just carries on like that. And this isn't not just the visuals, but the music. Like, it's just to get you out of that loop and that cycle, and get you out of that way of thinking, because that is not life. Living like a zombie is not life. Life is experiencing things, and maybe you don't want to have kids. Maybe you want to be an artist. Maybe you want to paint things. Maybe you want to draw things. Maybe you want to make music. Maybe you want to tour the world and play festivals or something, play music at festivals and shit. And that's kind of, granted, that's in the messaging of industrial music, but that they also took that into account, the visuals that explored those kind of topics, and were trying to push people and shock people into life is not just some simple A to B to C to, life is like A to F to Z to whatever, right? Life isn't necessarily a straight line, and we can't just accept what's being fed to us via the media or, the newspapers, whatever it is, the media, TV, or social media nowadays. You know, you can't just accept what's being fed to you. You have to think about these things, and you have to understand what is being said, how it's being said to you, and how that language affects you or even controls you. When we get into industrial music, they were taking the same ideas of William Burroughs or Brian Geisen and cutting things up and rearranging them. And sometimes that's cutting up newspapers or whatever it is, and then turning those into different things by randomly pulling them out of a hat and organizing them as they come out. Or those are lyrics, cut up lyrics, or it's even the idea of taking some audio and, you know, singing those cut up lyrics, or taking some samples from the news reporting that's going on and cutting that up and reorganizing that. And yeah, really fucking good book. I would highly recommend this. I could go on and on and on about this stuff, but I highly recommend this. This is definitely recommended industrial music literature reading. I would say, I'm not sure what order I would put these things in. I would say if you're going to start with anything, I would say definitely start with the Industrial Culture Handbook by Research Press. I think that's kind of the place to start. Maybe after that, read Assimilate by S. Alexander Reid. Yeah, I'm not sure what order I would read these in. This is definitely not the first one to read. Unless, of course, you're just interested in the visual aspects of industrial music culture. You could read this first, but obviously this is the last thing I've read out of almost every piece of industrial music literature that I've acquired over time. Yeah, maybe I should do another video getting into which books I would read first and kind of how I'd approach them. Maybe I'll do that in another video. This one is just about this book. Once again, highly recommended. Definitely recommended industrial music literature. This, I think I got this on Amazon for $110 or $112. It is quite pricey, but it is worth it. It is completely worth it. It's about 600 pages, and I thought it was going to be a little bit of a difficult read because there is a lot of pages here, but it's actually not that difficult. There's all kinds of visuals in here. Like I said, I'm not going to show them because I think they're not really appropriate for YouTube to a certain degree. Yeah, here's something from Psychic TV. There's some images from Psychic TV, and I'm not sure this is... Yeah, stuff like that. Here's the... Oh, that's right. So this image... I do believe is a recreation of, well, I won't get into it. You'll read about it if you do end up getting this book. Super interesting what they came up with this image. They get into things like the idolization of like Charles Manson and stuff in this as well, and the reason why those visuals are used and that whole thing, or even, you know, for some of the musicians or artists, they get into things like idolization of like murderers and stuff like that. That was probably the most difficult section for me to read in this book because I don't like violence. I don't like reading about that stuff. I don't want to know anything about that kind of thing. That was probably the most difficult section or chapter, whatever it is. But it is a good read, and I would highly recommend this. I know I've said that plenty of times. So if you ever get the chance to read this, definitely do it. Definitely recommended industrial music literature. That's it for this video. I hope you enjoyed it. I know this one's a little bit longer, but I had a lot to say about this book. Probably I already stated it, probably one of the best books I've read in quite some time. If you have any questions or comments, leave them in the comment section. I'll try to answer them. Anything about this book, I'll try to answer them to the best of my ability. If you enjoyed this video, please give it a like. If you feel it has value, please share it. And if you feel this channel has value, please hit that subscribe button and be notified when the next video comes out. So see you in the next video.